I'm Leeann Doerflein. I've been working in Johnson County since 2020. I've been the editor since 2022. I have loved living here in Franklin, and I was kind of inspired by the lack of informed opinions online that I've seen, particularly our beloved Facebook groups that sometimes have not the correct facts or have misunderstood them a little bit. So I thought that it would be good to get journalists together to talk about what we do and why we do it and how to kind of decipher the news, I guess, a little bit and stuff like that. So that's why we're all here, and we're excited to talk to you. Emily?
Hi, I'm Emily Ketterer. I am the editor of Hannah News Service. So what we do is we publish 3 newsletters weekly and bi-weekly. I write a newsletter about education and also our newsletter about transportation. We also publish Indiana Legislative Insight, which is a politics newsletter. So I cover the State House and mostly education policy and transportation policy issues. I used to work for the Daily Journal for a total of 3 years, back and forth. Most recently, I was there for about a year until I left in 2023. And there I covered Johnson County, Trafalgar, Whiteland, Greenwood, Bargersville briefly. So that's me.
My name's John Herrick. I'm the news director at WIBC in Indianapolis. We also service a statewide radio network called Network Indiana. So we are, for those of you who don't know, we are very big into news and politics. We have a news division, which I run, and then the talk shows do their own thing, which is separate. They are opinion, we are fact-based, but we all work together, or try to, as best we can. And I kind of just got into news because I've been primarily into sports most of my life, but I got very encouraged during my college time at DePaul University by my faculty advisor, Jeff McCall, about getting possibly into news. And I started doing newscasts on the air and got pretty good at it. And then I really enjoyed speaking truth to people who spread rumors and lies on campus. And I liked correcting all that. And I think we all share that same passion up here. So that's when I really got a passion for news, was in college, and I'm glad I got to continue it here.
And I'm Casey Smith. I'm a senior reporter for the Indiana Capitol Chronicle, which is based in Indianapolis. I'm actually a resident of Franklin, though. And we are part of a national nonprofit called State's Newsroom, and we have a collection of journalists in all 50 state capitals across the country. So I report on a lot of things, anything and everything, state government and politics. Any news outlet across the state can republish us for free. We kind of operate like the Associated Press, which is where I worked before I came here. There is no Associated Press presence in Indiana at all anymore, so we have really tried to step in and kind of be a replacement source of news, especially given that the AP for many, many decades was a main source of state house coverage for papers like the Daily Journal and others across the state. So during the legislative session, I am in any and all committee meetings and in the House and Senate until the wee hours of the morning with our state legislators, sometimes 5 in the morning if it's towards the end of session. And then this is kind of like our off season right now. And so I cover anything from state agencies to different matters that affect any sort of statewide issue. So last week, for example, I've covered death row very in depth the past years. We've restarted executions, for example. That's been a main coverage area. Government shutdown, we're very focused on that. Immigration, all sorts of, anything and everything, we're there. Why I'm a journalist, I don't, I guess I'm a naturally very nosy person, to be completely honest with you. And that's probably, I always read the news. We had the hard paper newspaper growing up when I was a kid. And so I would read it to my dad in the mornings. As cliche as that is, that's what I would do. And I really found a love for newspapers that way. But I'm also just a digger, and I like looking things up. I like figuring things out, and this is a great field for that. And there's a lot that needs figured out every day. And like Leeann said, there's a lot of misinformation out there that can proliferate really easily, especially with social media. And so we just try to be a constant source of accurate information.
I'm John Krull. I'm the director of the Pulliam School of Journalism at Franklin College and the publisher of the StateHouseFile.com, which provides content for news outlets all over Indiana and frankly all over the country, judging from some of the hate mail I get these days. And I want to apologize. I had a story conference that ran out a little bit longer than I would have liked regarding a story we got somebody working on. So I apologize for coming in a few minutes late. I'm assuming the prompt was I was supposed to speak to why I became a journalist. I can't sing or dance, so this was all that was left. We're supposed to talk in here tonight about why local news matters and why it is important to have news outlets in your communities, in your state, things that are specific to your interests and your needs. So I'm going to start by posing that question to the panel and also say here, this conversation is going to be a lot more fun for everyone if you folks talk too. If you bring the questions that you are concerned about to the discussion, they'll enjoy it more, you'll enjoy it more, and it'll be more productive and speak to the spirit of the occasion. So I'm assuming we start with Leeann. We'll start with Casey and go in reverse order this time.
In terms of why local news matters, I mean, I could probably sit up here and talk your ear off about it, but I think at a core, at least for the work that I do, state and local, I don't do as much hyper local necessarily, but the core of our work is to make sure that people understand what's going on in their state, in their communities, because that's how you make decisions every day. It affects the decisions when you go to the voting booth. It affects decisions when, what school you might send your kids to. It affects anything and everything, decisions in your day-to-day life, having accurate information about what's going on, especially for me, like at the state level, and understanding the decisions that are being made, why they're being made, who's making them, who's influencing those decisions. That's critical information that you have a right to know and that you should know. And I think that drives a lot of what we do. And I think about that constantly because if it weren't for local news or state news or reporters like ourselves, there are legislative committees, for example, where if I wasn't covering them at the State House, there would be nobody in that committee meeting. Nobody else is going to be there. And so without having a reporter there, you may not know what's happening. And these are big decisions can be made in a legislative committee. Laws are made in those committees. And it's the same at the local level too. If nobody's sitting in a school board meeting, nobody's going to be able to, report back what happened or to ask important questions to people in power or people, hold people to account. And so when you have local news that dwindles you lose that, and then you lose a lot of the trust in your public institutions, in your elected officials, and we cannot have that. So
I'm going to interrupt a minute. Can anyone in the back hear? Otherwise, we can have them pass the microphone down. That'd be helpful.
Just want to do this.
I think that'd be easier.
Yeah. Okay.
And how do you want to do it if we have questions from,
We'll just ask them to speak up.
are you live,
They
you
can
live
come up-
streaming?
No, we're recording it,
Okay,
so we'll post it on the
I'll tell you what, how about,
library page.
can I go handheld with this thing?
Sure, absolutely.
When you have a question, throw your hand up, I'll come to you. Okay, I'm assuming the cord will stretch that far, right?
Well, we have to come forward too, so we'll work on that.
Okay, well anyhow, John.
Okay.
please.
I'm used to this, my microphone near me. Yeah, local news, to her point too, I mean, all you gotta do is look at some of these local communities that now have news deserts because, stations are closed their doors, ownership has consolidated, jobs have been laid off. And the problem with that is that those people in those communities where that's happened, they're not as informed as they were before, not because of any fault of their own, but because they have fewer storytellers in their community to tell them what's going on. I can't tell you how many news stories I've done lately about people in positions of power who do stupid stuff and get arrested. And I'm like, how did that person get that job? Well, that's an elected position. So it's like, if people knew more about who that person was maybe beforehand, maybe they wouldn't have voted for that person. So you start to realize how important local news is, not just for politics and for elections, but also for the events around you, because they help shape your community and they help shape who you are. And I think a lot of people, a lot of students, especially today, they want to go national. They want to hit the big time, but it's like the big stuff is also happening in your community. And if you are missing that or not paying attention to that, you're missing out on what's going on in the world. And I've lived in Johnson County the majority of my life, and there's a lot of big things going around here all the time. So we see how important local news is all around us.
Yeah, so going off of what they said, local media is important. You think about everybody really seems to focus on the national news and what's happening at the national level. And then they don't always realize that the things happening in their community, whether it's like your town or your county or your state government, affect you more directly than what the people in DC are doing. And that's, what our job in local media is to make sense of all of that for you. At the State House is a little bigger level, right? We're writing about bills. Like I write a lot about education. So I'm taking all of the education bills. They passed like 25 education bills that have changed, what our schools are doing and how, and then, I have to make sense of what this law says. And then, a superintendent or a school district can read what I write, or, somebody who lives in that school district can read what I write and understand it better. Same thing with at the really local level. The Daily Journal, for example, is probably the only outlet that has reporters at pretty much almost every local board meeting in this county. I spent a lot of time going to these little towns like Trafalgar, and I was the only reporter there. And if you recall a couple of years ago when Trafalgar was making the front page of the Daily Journal all the time for some kind of crazy stories about what their elected officials were getting up to, that was because we started going to their meetings more, and then more people from the public started going to their meetings, and their little town council room would be packed on Thursday nights, and their meetings would last 4 hours. And people were talking about the stories I was writing, and I just, I don't know if anybody would have known what was happening there if, we weren't writing about it. So that's why, what we do as local journalists really matters to the community.
What Emily just said is why I do what I do, basically. And she was at that meeting because I, as her editor at the time, told her to be there and made it a priority to cover every community in Johnson County. Because, even if we don't have a ton of subscribers in Trafalgar yet, if we cover them, they will come. Like the cities like to say, if we build it, they will come. So it's kind of local news is why I'm a journalist. I had an internship at an outlet in Indy and an outlet in DC, and I was like, local is really like where my passion is, because growing up, I'm from Franklin County, Metamora specifically. You wouldn't really see my township government in the newspaper. But like as a journalist, you can make sure that that happens. Like Nineveh, the fire station drama that's happening in Nineveh right now. The TV stations found out of it because we were going. We found out about it because of, the legal ads and people talking about it on Facebook. But it's important that you be there so people can know what's going on, how their money's being spent, and how to vote as well. Like, I remember going to vote with my mom for the first time when I was 18. She was like, I don't know any of these people. I have no idea who to vote for. So I've always been like, I shouldn't let that happen to people. They should know who they're voting for, which is why we always do the Q&As every year, because you should know who you're putting in office. So that's why I think local media is important.
Let me follow up on that question. I'm going to stay with Leeann on this one because there's been a change in the news. Long ago, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I worked for the Indianapolis News and the Indianapolis Star, and they had bureaus, actually. A bureau down here that covered Johnson County, and in some ways competed with the Daily Journal. The Star now has pretty much abandoned that, and that leaves, in some ways, an opportunity for the Daily Journal. But it also creates, because you are pretty much the only game in town in Johnson County. Has that changed the way you go about doing what you do? Has it changed the mission for the paper? Shifted it, might be a better term. And if so, how?
Knowing that if we don't cover it, no one else probably will, we make it a priority to really get everywhere and find out as much as we can, because we're the only one, and if we don't do it, no one else will. It's kind of like you have to be a special person to be a journalist. You have to have the drive to go out and find the stories and make sure that they're there, because no one else can. Having the lack of competition is good. In that we don't have to compete directly with other outlets, but it's also not good for the people because they don't have as many sources. But we just have to make sure to prioritize that.
Emily, different question for you.
Okay.
You work now for what is a niche outlet and with a very targeted audience. How does that alter what you do? I mean, I'm assuming you report and you write with that audience in mind.
Yeah, so it does change. It changes how I look at it a lot, actually, and it's interesting. I don't see a lot of mean comments anymore, unlike when I worked at the Daily Journal and I would doom scroll people commenting on my story on Facebook. That doesn't happen with what I do now. It's a different audience. It's a lot of people in the industry, so a lot of political lobbyists, lawmakers. Every school superintendent in the state reads the education newsletter, so it's people who understand the jargon and how the legislative process works already. So there's not as much explaining like you would do when you're writing to the public audience. For example, the Daily Journal writes about a bill that's going through the legislative process at the State House. They have to do a little bit more, I think, to explain, what the process is like to get a bill to become law. And this is why it's, important for your community. I don't really have to do that with what I do because we are such a specific audience, and it changes the writing style a little bit. You can use more jargon and not have to explain what some kind of education program is or who this lawmaker is particularly, because the people reading the newsletters already know that. So that did change a lot of, it's still local news because it's the state of Indiana, I write about the entire state. but it is definitely a different audience, and so it changed kind of how I write and how I approach things, because I'm not necessarily really writing for the general public.
John, radio news has probably gone through the biggest sort of set of changes in the past 20 to 25 years of any branch of media. And in some ways you've got this odd challenge where the stuff you do for radio, traditional radio, is for an older audience, not to offend all of you folks, but basically you are the demographic you're speaking to at that point. But you've also got to transition over to that digital audience. How do you balance those responsibilities?
Well, I kind of learned that in college, you've got to be able to do all three: the written form for the digital aspect, and then the audio form of storytelling, which is a little different than that. And then, you also have to be willing to do the digital component where you take videos. That was very helpful during the whole Mark Sanchez fiasco earlier this month. So we had a couple of reporters going to the scene and taking some videos for our Instagram for our younger audience. But you do need to be able to do all three in this form, because to your point about how much it's changed, I mean, WIBC's newscasts used to be 4 or 5 minutes long, and now they're all a lot shorter. Sometimes they're only 2 minutes at the top of the hour, or 1 minute, depending on what time of day it is. So you can't get to every single news story in every single newscast. So how do you get to the rest of it? Well, that's where the digital component comes in. That's where the social media component comes in. And that's where, if we want to go and expound a bit on a story that might be big, we can do that with our video and social media coverage. So and we have to do that also on a limited budget. We don't have the staff that we did 20 years ago, back when Mike Pence was at WIBC. So you just don't have that anymore. So you've got to be willing to do what you can with the little that you have, and be willing to sacrifice a lot of your own time to tell stories to the audience that matter.
Casey, you're part of a real new development in news, in that not all that long ago, about the only not-for-profit news operations around the public media, maybe Mother Jones. And now, of course, and I should say, in the spirit of full disclosure, the StateHouseFile.com is also a not-for-profit news operation, and so is Indiana Capitol Chronicle. What is that like, having worked on both sides of the for-profit, not-for-profits street? Has it changed in any way? Is it a different kind of dynamic when you work?
I think in terms, is this on?
You have to flip the switch.
Yeah, oh, there you go. I think in terms of the reporting doesn't change, right? I mean, the shoe leather reporting, the process for me has not changed, but I think some of the decisions about coverage do change. I've worked for-profit news before in Indianapolis and in the East Coast and West Coast elsewhere. The decision-making, especially from editorial leadership, is more so guided, for example, by page views sometimes. So you want clicks. If people want to read it, we need to write about it more. And that may not always be, in my opinion, the most important news. That being said, I'm not saying that we don't make, in nonprofit news, that we don't make decisions to a certain degree about what people care about, but it doesn't drive nearly as much our coverage plan. So like I said earlier, there are committees that I sit in during the legislative session where I may be the only person sitting in the audience, not just the only journalist. I may be the only person and the lawmakers are there. Not as often anymore, and we have live streaming now, so people can watch online, but there are larger outlets that are in the State House that are part of the press corps, where those are not necessarily the committees that they're going to prioritize, because those bills may not be viewed as important, or they're not going to drive as many clicks. But those bills very well may still turn into laws. Same goes for other state agency meetings where oftentimes I may be the only one sitting in a state ethics commission meeting, for example, but then state officials can lose their jobs in those meetings, for example, and that's really important. But to get back to the point, I don't think the reporting itself changes. It doesn't necessarily change the questions that I've asked or the doggedness in the reporting. But I think I do have more autonomy here at the Capitol Chronicle and the nonprofit model, which I really appreciate. And I don't know if it's because we're a nonprofit or if it's just because of the work we do. But since starting here, and the Capitol Chronicle has existed since 2022, we just had our 3rd anniversary in June. I have never had as many readers reach out to me, want to have conversations about stories, ask questions, engage. And again, I can't say if that's because of the nonprofit model or what it is, but that has been very refreshing. I do try to respond back to as many folks as possible, but it's been, when I worked at the Star, for example, I would get hate mail sometimes, but not as many questions and such.
It's a special gift I have, I guess. And this is my reminder. So, reminder, yes, that if you have questions, throw your hand up and I'm going to come out to you. Please identify yourself. I'll hold on to you. That way you don't hold hostage.
I'm Carol Sewell. I'm from Herrick Township. And I look around the room and most of us have gray hair. You guys are talking about media today, but it's so much different from what it was when I was going through journalism school, or as I've grown over the years. We generally relied on newspaper, TV. And my question to you, I know somebody mentioned Instagram. Are you finding, am I just missing out because I don't do Instagram? Are there so many more outlets for news that maybe I'm not aware of? Are young people actually even interested in local news or any news for that matter? What's your experience with that?
Don't make this like a class.
Yeah. So I feel like all audiences are interested in local news, but obviously news in general, more like older people are more in tune with what's happening because, well, older people vote more. Older people, like, you don't generally see like anyone under 30 at a county council meeting unless they work for the county or unless they're a homeowner and something's happening in their neighborhood. But yeah, I feel, and like looking at we can all see like on the back ends of our social media, like who is looking at stuff, and there's demographics on our website. It's definitely across the board interest in local news, I find. But the trouble is you have to figure out where the young people are and what they're interested in, but you also can't alienate your bread and butter as well. So you have to kind of balance who you want to make mad today or you want to make happy today, all that kind of stuff. So it's you just have to think about who you're gearing the content for. And like with Instagram and stuff, like generally all the outlets are like sharing the same stories just on the different social media to get people everywhere they are. It's kind of the principle of social media. Anyone else want to
I'll add to it.
add?
I got you. We'll let them weigh in as well.
So there are multiple forms, I think, emerging.
of how news is presented to try and capture a younger audience. I don't know how well it's working. Most young people, I think, get their news from social media and just from like posts on Twitter, not even necessarily Instagram, or looking at, videos on TikTok. They prefer to see it there in front of them, more so than even clicking on a link and we're just like welcomed with a paywall. So young people, I think, also don't want to pay for news as less, and they try and find a way to get around it. So they prefer to try and get news from Twitter, or a lot of news outlets, especially in Indianapolis, really have leaned heavy in recent years on newsletters, which is, I'm in the newsletter business. That's all I do is write newsletters. But it's not, basically they come into your email and everything you read, you don't necessarily have, some of them are free, you don't have to pay for them. Like Axios is a good example, I think, that really writes to a younger audience. It's less like long form journalism, what you're used to, but the reporting is still the same. Like nothing has changed. There's just different ways that we're telling it. And a lot of the time, like Leeann said, they're posting the same story, maybe in different formats. Like if the same story goes on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, or it goes into your inbox in a newsletter. It's maybe written a little differently for that platform. Sometimes people like to do Twitter threads, and that's mainly a personal preference. Like a lot of State House reporters several years ago used to tweet all the time, live tweet meetings. That's less so now. Most of the time people just tweet important breaking news, or they'll just post links to their stories. So yeah, anybody else want to add?
If I could just add very quickly to that. I agree with a lot of what's just been said. I do want to say, I really appreciate this question. It's a conversation that we're having a lot in our newsroom, especially given we are not our work is not behind a paywall. We are not subscriber based. Anybody can read our work. That being said, our reporting, we actually are trying to somewhat change the approach to our reporting, in that to get younger people to read the work, they also have to be to a certain degree represented in the reporting. And so that means engaging younger people more in the reporting process. And to a certain degree, that means interviewing, younger people, for example, or covering issues from maybe a slightly different angle that focuses more on what younger people might like, or is important to them. With bills, for example, we try to do that with education bills, for example, instead of just, and no offense, going to like the 60-year-old lawmakers in the State House and asking them 5 different 60-year-old lawmakers about a bill. What about, the 17, 18-year-old who showed up to testify today? Let's talk to them. Let's get their point of view on this. Let's talk to the younger teachers who are there, getting them into the stories as well. I think we've started to see some success in getting more readership that way. We are not great about posting on other modes yet. We are a small newsroom of 4 people, so doing anything beyond written form and photos to the best of our abilities can sometimes be a challenge. But yeah, social media, Emily's right. Like that is, if the Gen Z and younger, like that is definitely their place to get news. So we have to, I think, as an industry, do better about that.
John, you look like you were leaning into.
Well, I mean, yeah, everything they said was totally right about it. But one thing I will say where social media can come into great help is breaking news. So, for example, I can't tell you how many times one of my reporters was like, dude, there was a shooting like 5 feet from my house. Like, I'm going to go there and cover it. And then they live stream it. They get on our Facebook Live and they start that. And all of a sudden you just see the viewers start coming in and the comments are a-flying while we're waiting to see what's actually going on. That's where it can be a massive, massive help. And sometimes that's happened when one of us is on our way to the station, but we can't get there because we're stuck in Indianapolis traffic, because you can't get to Indianapolis from Indianapolis right now.
Yeah.
So when that happens, you have to find a way to tell the story right there. You don't have time to get into the studio to turn on the microphone and get going. It's the social media aspect of it is challenging at times, but it also allows you to be more flexible. And I think that's its biggest strength.
Mm-hmm.
And I should add, to put this in context, local media is not the only place or media news outlet dealing with these challenges. Everybody is struggling to connect with younger audiences. Everyone. Leeann, did you have a final point you wanted to make?
Yeah. Well, social media, I feel, is really important. I have questions in my like job interviews for new reporters, like how do you use social media? Like as much as I like think that like the Facebook groups are full of misinformation, like sometimes they're right. And you can look into it, like you see something, you're like, oh, the Smoothie King is gonna open on Tuesday. And why did I just sound Canadian then? So you can look into that, and sometimes they're right. And a lot of people are going to Facebook to see their news. Like a lot of our audience, I feel like, is on Facebook. We definitely get audiences on Twitter and Instagram as well. We've been talking about TikTok, flirting with the idea. Just need to get more time to do it. But social media is like a gold mine, I feel, for local journalism, because even if it's sometimes wrong, there is good information on there. Like half the time when you see there's like a shooting story, like we see someone say, what's going on at such and such place? And then you call the Greenwood, because usually Greenwood, PIO, and be like, hey, is something happening here? And he's like, yes. Or he's like, no, I don't know what they're talking about. So it's really useful and really not useful. You just have to pick through the garbage to find the gold.
Sir? I'll hold it.
Leeann Doerflein earlier said something that triggered a real problem for me, and I'm wondering how you manage this. You said specifically that sometimes you pick this bunch that you want to get angry at you, or that bunch. And I don't know how you can manage that, because if you're worried about that, then how are you going to tell the truth? Which is really far more important. And I don't think that's local only.
Yeah.
It's local, it's state, it's national, and the whole notion of bias in the media is our biggest problem nationally, because the people don't know what's going on, they don't seem to care, and the whole country might be at risk because of all of that. And I think that's a critical point. I want to know how you manage that, because that's important.
Yeah, it definitely is. Well, it's like I try not to think too much about who you're going to make mad, because like you said, it is about the truth. Like you just have to report the facts, and if someone doesn't like the facts because of their political viewpoint, that's often where the allegations of bias come from. A lot of people these days, I don't know if it's because of cable news, I don't know if it's because of just like where the world is today, but it seems like a fact is just what you want to make of it anymore. To us, like facts are what we deal with. We tell the people the facts and we give them the context for the facts, why the fact is the way it is, and then what people are saying about it. So it definitely is a balance, but you just have to kind of bravely go forward and just tell the truth and hope people will care and accept it. Like me personally, like making sure that bias isn't in a story is like top of mind always. Like I carefully think about every word that I use. I try not to like use descripting word, like unless it's a story that you need to describe something, like what something looks like, you try to just like use the words that you have to use and not add anything that could suggest you believe something one way or the other. You just kind of have to turn off your own biases as much as possible. It's never like truly possible to completely eliminate it, but you do your best. You sanitize it as much as you can, and you get the facts out there. What else about bias would anyone like to say?
I think I'll add to that. I think we as journalists can do a little better at kind of opening up what it's like in our world to the public, because I think some of the accusations of bias just come from not understanding fully what the reporting process looks like. And I'm not like blaming the public for that. I think that's partially our fault as well. Sometimes when you're writing a story, people will refuse to talk to you on the other side, and then you'll get accusations of saying, well, you didn't tell the whole story. So it's important to be transparent. And, when, I'm writing a story, if somebody doesn't respond back to me, I'm going to put that in the story. Sometimes people miss that because it's usually only like one sentence. And then it does make these stories look one-sided sometimes, just because you couldn't get anybody on the other side to talk to you. And that happens quite often. And yeah.
How much of that, let me just step in and follow up, because I think how much of that is also a question of developing greater media literacy and getting people, because you're right. I don't think people get the fact that often when someone refuses to talk to you, it's because they know you're going to pose questions that they do not have good answers. And that is not something we often explain when we're doing this. Emily, since you raised the subject, I'll give you first crack, but I can tell by the body language. Everyone wants to
I think it fits into the picture. That's kind of what I was touching on. There's just media literacy, and even like your sources don't have maybe the best media literacy, because sometimes I think if a source is not wanting to talk to you, like my experience is they don't think you're going to publish the story if they don't talk to you. That's not always the case. Sometimes, it's like I don't have anything else, so I have to hold on this until I can convince them to talk to me, or I can find another source. But, that happened in, for example, Trafalgar. I wrote about an elected official, and he kept giving me the runaround for an interview. And I told him several times, if, this is your chance to tell your side of the story. If you don't, only their comments are going to be in here about you. And, you miss out. And I ended up doing a follow with him, and he wasn't mad at me, because I think he just had a lack of understanding on what was going to happen if he didn't do an interview initially. So, it's definitely the broader media literacy issue. And I don't really know, we as journalists can play a role in fixing that and showing the process a little more. And I think that will help people understand. It's also an education issue as well in school, teaching literacy in general, and then also just media literacy, how to comprehend what you're reading. I'll let somebody else go. You guys want to go?
Casey, since you've got one.
I'll be brief, but it was said earlier, we've been talking about how the landscape has changed for readers, but I think we have to recognize too that, and again, this is about explaining process better. The landscape has also changed even in the last 5-10 years for reporters quite a bit. For example, yes, when folks don't want to answer your questions, and I get that all the time, you have to either figure out how to get around that and still put out a balanced story that tries to still get to the truth. But we also live in a world, for example, where, and I've noticed this, in the last 10 years even, we don't always have direct access to the people who are in power, for example, or who we need to ask questions to. There are barriers to access. There are PIOs. There are, everything. We have to have questions in writing over email. We live in a world too where, you got to turn stories to a certain degree, not just because you got an editor breathing on your neck, sometimes you do, but also because you want to get things out to people while it's newsworthy. And there are barriers left and right. And it's a tactic, oftentimes, especially in state government, to slow a reporter down, to try to kill a story. This happens every day. This is very challenging. And when you're trying to write 3 stories a day, process-wise, we do our best. And when you're on a small team, I can understand, and I welcome, like I said earlier, interaction with readers all the time, because I'll get questions. Why wasn't so-and-so quoted in your story? Or why didn't you reach out to this person? We increasingly try to when we try to reach out to folks, and they don't get back to us. But I think we need more and more. And I love talking to folks in my email when they call me and ask me about this and say, hey, here's how this story came to be. And to that, one last thing. If we put out a story, for example, where we weren't able to get the questions answered that we wanted to, or we weren't able to just really get to the bottom of whatever it is, I think we need to do a better job too as journalists to go back to that, not just leave it. And it takes, this is an exhausting job, but you've got to be, we've got to stick, you got to stick to it, so.
Yeah, and along with that, one of the things that she brought up is very important. I mean, when you go into, especially when you interview a politician, you pretty much know what questions you need to ask a certain politician, and you all know what the big questions are. And if they look at you and go, I'm not going to answer any questions about that, and I go, okay, well, I don't know what I'm doing here then. I mean, if you're not going to answer the questions that the people are going to want to hear, then I'm just going to report that you weren't willing to do it. And then all of a sudden, it's amazing how, okay, hold on a second, John, let's get the tape rolling. We'll go on and do it now. I'm like, oh, it's funny how you changed your tune there. And another thing that helps is attribution. I'm not a person that's ever been above that. So we write news briefs for our statewide network. And if a media outlet like the Capitol Chronicle or the Daily Journal is the only person to report a story, and I think it's a big story, both locally and statewide, you're going to see me in the brief write the Daily Journal reports, the Indiana Capitol Chronicle reports. And I like doing that because I want the public to see that this isn't just one outlet that's got their eye on this story. This is multiple ones. So that, I think, helps build credibility and trust with people when we see it as more of a we or an us thing instead of an I or a me thing, because some journalists are guilty of that. Or you can't make it about you. There's so much more at stake here than just one person.
Can I ask that if you don't have anything fresh to add, we have now got 5 questions.
Okay.
Let's you can answer first.
I'm Rich Gottschall. I spent nearly 50 years in newspaper journalism in a different environment. Today, all of you mentioned the pressures of social media. How do you respond to inaccuracies in social media?
You can start. I turn the microphone on.
Well, I do that sometimes. It is a slippery slope because sometimes they come for you if you do. But like if someone asked, for example, what's happening here, like I'll put the story that we wrote about it. Or like I tried to do this a little bit with the US 31 project. Like people would say something and I would be like, this is when it's happening, or that's not really how it's happening. This, and this road is going to close. It's going to happen on this day. So the inaccuracies on social media is something that you can address, but you have to be careful. It's better to do it on your own page, but I'll reach into the chatter group sometimes at my own peril. But making sure people have the correct information is something that local journalists really should make sure happens. So kind of had to do that. So anyone want to add?
You encompassed it.
I'll just go really briefly. It is definitely a fine line because you feel the urge, at least I did, especially when I was at the Daily Journal. And sometimes I do now because a lot of people misinterpret education legislation as being like not quite what it is. And I know like it's frustrating for me to read that and I just want to help them understand. But then people will be really negative to you in the comments. So it's definitely a fine line. You can't like sound like too like know-it-all or sassy, or because social media can sometimes come across that way. So I try to not comment, but sometimes I feel like I should, just because, well, I have this knowledge, I should share it with this person. So hopefully it'll help them better understand or realize this isn't quite as bad as they thought it was.
Casey, did you
real quick, sometimes it's good fodder for a story. There was an example earlier this year where there was a lot of misinformation on social media about a new attendance law for schools that went into effect. And I just turned it into a question and answer story about here's what the law does and does not do. And I have seen that story. I just saw it shared again today in a social media group. So I do hope that it has worked as intended.
Yeah, there was actually a documentary just last week, I think it was on public television, about investment corporations buying up local newspapers. I wondered if you would address that. I mean, it was horrific, scary. You know, they just go in not to save local news, but to destroy it and then take the equity from that. And you know, what can our community do to save our local news and newspaper? You know, they talked about public funding of local newspapers was one solution. So how do you protect yourself from that?
Casey's been teed up in one way, but I'll answer this. So, Leeann, take out a subscription to your local newspaper.
Yes.
But
That
like
one's
you said,
easy.
kids don't want to do that. I mean, you know, young people don't want to do that. So it's hard. I mean, I tell everybody I can take, you know,
Well,
Daily Journal.
I guess I would say do a gift subscription to your children, to your grandchildren, to whomever.
That's a good idea.
So Casey, though, the not-for-profit and public funding.
I have a bias here in that
Right. How does that work?
I do think that the nonprofit model is, and there's a lot of discussion in the journalism, the media community about is nonprofit a good future or not. I do think it is for part of that reason in that it's not the corporate model. It's not, you know, I'm not going to say that there's editorial leadership above me who they may have conversations. They're aware of who our donors are, for example, but that's not those aren't conversations that I'm part of or that influence my work ever. I mean, not that I'm aware of. It's not been a discussion that we've had in my newsroom. And to be honest with you, we're part of States Newsroom, which is a national nonprofit, but locally, the Capitol Chronicle, we kind of operate on our own. The vast majority of our donations that we get are $100 or less, and they're from readers, and that's who supports us.
How do you advertise? Like, I wouldn't have known how to.
And we're grant funded, for example. In terms of how to donate, you can go to our website. How to donate, but we do, I mean, and a lot of our operating fund comes from, you know, other large nonprofits or foundations who don't have any sort of editorial influence, but they fund for me to be able to go up to, you know, Michigan City to cover executions and stay in a hotel and do all of that, for example. So that's, you know, I think that model is, I said earlier, I have a lot more autonomy in this model. We don't get direction from clicks or subscribers about how to direct our reporting. I don't know how sustainable it's going to be in the future. Thankfully, I'm not on the financial team where we're at. We have, you know, other folks who do that, but I hope that is a good future. I don't know. And John, you might have, because you're in that world as well.
Well, it does create a certain pressure in terms of raising the money to keep the thing going. Year after year. I also would point out that we shouldn't romanticize the days of the for-profit news operations too. When I worked at the Indianapolis News, the Indianapolis Star, the example I always use is that they would publish these huge sections about the rollout of the new automobiles that were coming out that were just laden with ads from the dealerships. And the cars, in theory, were being reviewed there, but all of them got glowing reviews. You know, if the wheels fell off the thing at the second you drove it off the parking lot, you still were going to get a 5-star review because that was the cash cow for the newspaper. There are always going to be economic pressures with any model you have here. And I would argue that that is a reason probably for the media literacy, the awareness. We've talked about avoiding bias here. There is a new ethic too that in some ways has come to I was going to use the word Trump, but that's a loaded word these days, that takes precedence over avoiding on questions of bias, and that is transparency. That you show why you're doing, where you get your funding, and all of that, so that the audience can make up its own mind about, the relevance of that to the work. I think you had your hand up next, and this gentleman right back here. I might say, folks on this side, if this were a race, they'd have laughed you 4 times.
I want to return to, is that on? I want to return to the topic about educating people about what you do, educating the legislators. So during the time they were passing budgets and PBS funding was under fire, I wrote a letter to all of my legislators and said, please support. And I got similar ones back from all 3 of the people I wrote to, saying that PBS is a biased system of reporting, and that's why they don't think public tax dollars should be used to support that. But, and then, when you look at those bell curves of the bias ranking, PBS happens to fall a little bit to the left. But I'm curious about how you educate people to say, obviously they have to pick and choose the topics they are reporting on, and that may be where the accusation of bias comes in, but how do you deal with that to say, hey, this isn't a biased article, or this isn't a biased set of information I'm giving you? It's our politicians that think that.
I guess I'll go.
All right, go ahead.
That is the hard part. And you're right, there is some bias. Everybody has bias, and I think we need to stop pretending that even as journalists we don't have bias. Not necessarily politically, like, you can be objective, but you do have bias when you choose what to write about a little bit, right? That doesn't necessarily mean you have it out for somebody, some lawmaker that you're asking a question to. I mean, the best way, and I think my experience is if you explain to them, to anybody who has a question of like, this is biased, you explain to them the process that you went through, and this is why I wrote this. But you have to have that person come to you and ask the question first. So that's also part of the issue, is at least the politicians and lawmakers, they don't necessarily get to that point where they're like, why did you do this? Sometimes some of them do. But they usually tend to have a better understanding after you explain, from my experience, explaining this is why I did this. And I always welcome, criticism, especially in what I do. A lot of experts in the field that I read about read my stuff. So a lot of them will reach out to me and say, hey, this isn't necessarily, your understanding is not wrong, but this is, how this really works. That happens a lot because I have a lot of experts who, in the field that I write about, reading my stuff. So yeah, it's just my experience. You just have to explain to them why you wrote it the way that you did. This person didn't respond, so maybe it does seem one-sided because this person on this side would talk to me, kind of going back to what I had said before. Anybody else want to add? Or?
Can I step in and sort of reframe the question here? And I hope I'm not jumping on the kind woman's line of questioning here. But would it be worth acknowledging, do you think, our point that we do have a bias? I mean, there is a bias among all journalists in favor of truth. And that's, you know, the guy politician who lies to you, probably is gonna get exposed. That's your job. Fair point or unfair?
I think that's a fair point.
They didn't lie.
Another great revelation.
I like to think, because I am biased to the truth, that a lot of people like to think that we as journalists have vendettas against them. Like, you know, the party in power, you know, like the Republican Party is in power in the state house. There's just more of them. So it tends to be, a lot of the news coverage tends to be more about the Republicans because there are more of them. They're the ones making the decisions. It doesn't mean that we have it out for them. Or, you know, local elections, you know, I don't care. You know, I don't live in the community necessarily that I'm writing about. I don't live in Greenwood, so I don't care who wins the mayor's race personally. I just care about the truth and about who these people are. So I think that's important to explain to people.
Sir?
Hello, I'm Greg Reardon. I'm Leeann's husband. Hello, honey. I'm a software engineer by trade, and I kind of want to go back to social media and ask a question about recently studies have come out that have suggested that the dead internet theory is real, and that there are more bots on the internet than there are humans, that there are 51% bots now. And I was wanting to ask, what challenges as journalists do you face with that, and do you think there's any kind of meaningful way to help combat all those bots that are online and stuff like that?
I can take this one. This is fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of, there we go, I got it. There's a lot of bots that love to come after WIBC's X account, as you can probably imagine. And a lot of it's designed, right, to sort of generate a reaction. And to her point, you know, we just try to remember, I just try to remind any politician who's had an issue with the story we wrote that we didn't just wake up that morning and decide, how can we go after you? That's not what happens, I promise you. There's a scene in the movie Rock of Ages where the reporter goes to one side of the protest and he puts the mic up, and then he goes to the other side and he puts the mic up there. That's what we're doing a lot. We're getting people's perspectives, and then it makes the other side irate. And I'm like, I'm just trying to get the word out about what people are saying about this particular topic. And you can kind of tell when a bot is coming after you when it's like the sentences aren't completely formed and there's words misspelled, or it's clearly a scantily clad, artificially made woman in some sort of ridiculous outfit. You're like, that's not real. You can just tell. And so that's, you kind of almost have to expose that a little bit. You almost have to give that a repost and go, folks, this isn't real. Just so anybody who's reading our story, just know that. It's, and every once in a while, to her point, to Leeann's point that she made earlier, you do have to sort of engage with it just to remind people that this isn't real, so that people can acknowledge what is real. And then eventually, over the period of a thread, they can tell what's the real part of the story and what isn't. So, but that is, yeah, you're right. The bots definitely make things interesting and tricky at times.
I can take it.
First of all, I didn't plant that question. Just want to throw that out there. I do like the question though. So it's hard to say, so most of our interaction comes with Facebook, and we have some people that post that you're like, is this a bot? Is this a burner account? Who is this really? And you just kind of have to think about that, who is trolling you right now. Generally, you could just hide the comment if it's too crazy. If it's totally out of left field, doesn't have anything to do with the post, you would just hide it because no one really needs to see it if it's not relevant. But generally they come in hot and they'll comment something totally left field. And it's kind of funny because sometimes people argue with the bots and then you're like, is this a machine that you're arguing with? Is this a real person who won't tell you their name? So it's just kind of funny, but it's also bad because some of the bots might be from Russia, for example. We all heard about how the Russian bots were trying to steal the election or whatever people were saying. So you just have to think about like who is actually saying things. It's both for us and the general public.
I'm Ron West, and for the sake of transparency, I must admit I'm an elected official in Johnson County. I've got several things I'd like to touch on just briefly. One of them is I couldn't agree more that we need to keep our local media, our local papers. And I just have to question, so many smaller towns have lost that venue. And I gotta believe that it's profit-based, that if you can't pay the bills, you can't stay open. So where I'm going with this is that even though the paper, and I can tell you from my personal experience, the Daily Journal has always been very fair with me in the reporting and allowing me to comment sometimes through the editorial page, especially to this gentleman to my right here. Anyway, so my point is that even though your reporting is spot on and truthful, the bias that you incur from the general public comes through your guest columnists, sometimes some of the other contributors that you have.
Mm-hmm.
I look at the newspaper as bringing 3 or 4 things to me. 1, information. 2, to educate, sometimes through the contributors that you have. Professor Larry DeBoer is one of the best in the state if you want to education on property taxes. And then, of course, entertainment or amusement. And even though you do a good job on your reporting, if those other 2 areas have extreme bias, then you're going to be perceived as being biased or prejudiced in your reporting, even though you're 100% truthful. So my question now is, you're in Johnson County, we're about 85% of one persuasion down here. But when I talk to the people that have ceased subscribing to the Daily Journal, I say, well, why? I find it entertaining. I just can't take the stuff they got in there anymore. So that bias bleeds over into what you're trying to do in an honest fashion. I just think that maybe if I was an editor or an owner, I might be trying to trend a little bit more like WIBC.
Oh, okay.
Well, and I use them for a comparison because they're probably just on the opposite spectrum of what I'm trying to explain here. Thank you.
Yeah, so I see. So as far as the opinion page goes, I go back and forth on whether it should exist or not, like on a daily basis. It's hard to find opinions out there. Like I only have a few sources of opinions, and the AP used to provide more stuff, but they don't do that anymore. Like the editorials. That's why I stopped running editorials in general, except for the one that we wrote the other day about saying that Mike Pruitt should probably resign. So I feel like there's not a lot of selection. I will ask, like when people bring it up, I'll say, maybe you should write a column. I've even like approached the Republican Party, asking if anybody would be interested, and no one is. So, and unfortunately, a lot of the opinion that's available is is either like straight on, like it doesn't really have a bias, it's just sharing facts, like something to do with how Medicaid's affected or something like that. Or like tomorrow's opinion page has Dr. Feldman talking about why menthol cigarettes should be banned, stuff like that. So it's either like straight on or it's trends to the left in general. So it's hard to find quality conservative content to put on the opinion page, unfortunately. That's what I personally run into.
That it's an opinion? By putting opinion. Yeah, that's supposed to be the signal. I've got a person back here and then I'll come to you, I promise. You don't understand.
My name is Ken Marshall, and it may be slightly redundant, but I'd like to go through each of you. We have such a great presence of social media now, of which we can believe maybe 1% of it. But how do you go through, what parameters do you decide in your filters of what's valid in media that you see, and I guess it's all media now, whether it's professional or not. How do you judge what's valid and what's not valid that you should pay attention to or discard? I'd like from each of you to hit.
I just talked. Casey, do you want to start?
For my own media consumption, is that kind of the question, or for how I use social media, I guess, in terms of within reporting? Because I'll be honest with you, it is very, very, very rare, unless it's an elected official making an official statement via their social media, that I will use anything from social media. It's not a primary source for me.
Social media is permeating society. You can't ignore it.
No, you can't ignore it. It's a starting point for the reporting, but it should not be. It should not be used as reporting unless, like I said, I mean, if I see something on if somebody posts something on social media, that's not a fact for me yet. There's other vetting that must be done. Typically, I need to find a primary sources, plural, typically. In terms of using it for reporting for myself, in terms of consumption, I try not to get a lot of my news. You need to vet out sources for yourself, find other news sources that also use primary sources. That put where they get their information from. The ones who are doing shoe leather reporting, who aren't just reporting off of what somebody else said or an anonymous source or what have you. I mean, you need to see evidence of fact gathering, and then don't just read the one story from the Indy Star. Like, what did Indy Star write? What did the Capitol Chronicle write about that same issue too? Because you can be reading, two different stories about the same issue, but get different information and different angles from those two different outlets too. And so this is, again, where media literacy comes in. We need to do a much better job of that, because the reader also needs to be able to a certain degree, do their own vetting also. It can't just be us.
Okay. Well, yeah, to that point too, and she brought up such a great point about social media with politicians, especially, because we'll call them for a story about something and they'll go, well, I put out a video on social media. That's cute. I have about 6 more questions that you didn't cover in your 1-minute video that you posted, sir. So you have to keep pressing these people, because just because what they put out on social media, it's nice, but it isn't the whole story. And especially if you're talking about something as important or as property taxes or education or an election that's coming up, you need to do more. Then there's comments when people are making them on articles that we post, and sometimes the comments are really mean-spirited. Now, I'm not for censorship most of the time, but when you start to get personal or start to call my reporters names, it's time to nix that. And usually our digital director is like, dude, no problem. I already saw that. I hid that, or I deleted it. And it's like, because some of that stuff there's no place for that I don't think there should be any place for it in a democratic society where we should be able to be civil to one another. So that is a time where we have to exercise some discretion. You can tell when there's people that are acting nobly on social media if they are reading our story and then they ask further questions. That's when you know that that's probably a real person wanting to know an answer to a question that's important. So I will sometimes tell my reporter that wrote the story, answer them. It's fine. Go if they want to know more, let's give them more. Mm-hmm. If we don't engage with them, they're not going to believe that we're, real or really out for the truth. They're going to just think that we are only reporting what we think is important and not answering their questions too, because we're here to serve the audience as well. So it's a tough thing to know when to balance what's real and what's not. But over time, you do start to get to see what what is real and what isn't, and you can make that distinction. But it does take some time, and you're going to probably need to take some, you're going to need to step away and rub your eyes a little bit, because you might be at the computer longer than you'd like to.
Personally, I do enjoy reading the Facebook group chats in Johnson County, but that's more of my personal enjoyment, and I don't necessarily take that as like my primary source of information. And I think people need to, it's a media literacy thing as well. People need to learn that they cannot rely on people posting on Facebook or on Twitter just alone to get their information, whether it's local news about, oh, well, I heard this happened down the street from here, or this business is closing, and then it's, ends up not being true. If I see something on social media, I usually go and try and find a news source that's reporting about it, and then I find multiple news sources. Or also, there's a lot of AI news out there, but reporting things that aren't true, just making up stories. And typically a red flag for that is if it's literally the only story that's out there about something that seems kind of crazy, and you would think, oh, maybe multiple outlets would be reporting about this, and then you don't find any more. That's a key teller that that is not a real story. Also in social media, it's valuable and it's a good starting point for reporters, but it can't be the only source of information. The issue with, especially state politicians, state lawmakers, the reason why they've become less accessible to especially reporters to actually answer our questions is because of social media in some way, because they have a direct access to their constituents. They can just post a video on Twitter or on Facebook, or post a statement on Twitter and Facebook, and that in their mind is saying, I am communicating with my constituents. I don't need to talk to you, reporter, or answer your questions. And so I think that plays a role in why they're less accessible in some ways. But you can't always trust, you can't always trust what they say just on social media alone either, because, there's probably, you have more questions, and they may not answer them on social media most of the time.
So how I approach social media and most things in journalism is an adage that my journalism professor, John Krull from the University of Indianapolis, said: if your mother says she loves you, check it out. Never take what you read on social media seriously, depending on who said it. You have to first of all look at who's saying it. Is it the city government? Because you could probably, what they're saying is probably true. You will need to expand on that more, because they're obviously not going to say everything that you need to know in one post. But beyond what politicians say or what random people on the internet say, another thing to think about when verifying things online is memes. There's a lot of political memes that are shared that are just outlandish quotes that someone said, or you'll see someone having fire behind a politician with some random statement that they said, and you're like, wow, I can't believe he said that. Maybe you should check and see if he actually did say it, because maybe he didn't. Maybe the meme is just made to inflame made to whip up the people and just make you angry about something. There's a lot of content like that out there that feed the echo chambers, other people mentioned. So it's important to consider your sources, to verify things. Like Emily said, if there's not multiple stories about something, it may not be true.
Yeah. I actually want to add something to that point at the end. I get asked sometimes how you can tell what a credible media source is. The easiest test is watch for when they make a mistake.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. If they acknowledge the mistake and correct it, that tells you they care about the truth, about getting things right. There are going to be times everyone doing this makes mistakes. That is not something you will see on social media. Mm-hmm. You can wait from now until the end of time for Facebook to correct something or any of the others. That should be the test. Sounds like an odd test, counterintuitive. They screwed something up, but that is the test. There was a hand up over here. Oh, you did? I'm sorry. And then this gentleman back here.
We talked about bias and we talked about diversity of thought. To me, that's what makes a newspaper. If we don't have that, we're losing the process of thinking. And we're all biased. What's changed in recent years is we don't tolerate each other's bias. And so I love the local newspaper and I love the diversity of columns in it. And I agree with some, I don't agree with others, but it's okay. I don't have to agree with what everybody else thinks. And the sad part about reporting the news now is that it's expected.
Anybody want to respond to that other than saying amen?
I think that's just to go off your point. That's one thing I think people forget is you're not going to like everything that your local news source writes about. And that's okay. And you also can just choose to not read that column. If you know that it's not going to fit your opinion, you can just dismiss it and say, I don't need to read that. Or you see a headline for a story that you aren't interested in, you don't have to read that. And I think people forget that you don't have to do that. But just because, one thing you don't like is in the newspaper doesn't mean that you have to just throw out the whole thing.
Yeah, and to your point about whenever you do report the news, sometimes people automatically assume it's a personal attack on them. I had a guy tell me I ruined his day because of my newscast one time. I was like, because it was really my intention to wake up and ruin your day, random guy. I promise you. So that's one of the most frustrating aspects of the job is that even when you're just doing your job like you would normally do every day, there's always going to be somebody out there that's going to have a problem with it. And social media has definitely made that worse. And to his point about correcting yourself right away, you really build credibility with your audience. One time I really messed up a headline, like bad. And of course, a guy was right there to tell me about it. And so I immediately was like, yeah, dude, I'm sorry. You're right. I'm going to correct it here in a second. And it was written on with my name next to it. So you almost have to just put it aside and not be too proud in situations like that.
One really quick thing, just to push back. Maybe you should read things sometimes that you don't necessarily agree with too.
Yep.
You said diversity of thought, and we are First Amendment forums, and part of developing a robust opinion about something means that you should be ingesting other people's opinions, even if they differ from yours. So.
Good evening. I'm Randy Gooden. First off, thank you all for being here and doing this. It's really appreciated, all of you. So thank you for that. Especially thank you to the Daily Journal, who's helped us in the city of Greenwood for the last 7 years reshape the southeast side of the city. Your help is very much appreciated. My question is, as one of those people that runs these social media platforms, how can we better verify the truth with you? I know we're not instantaneous in reporting, so it takes a little bit of time. Is there a backdoor way, some kind of credentialing or something you can offer specific people that we can reach you to verify this before we put it out there, or to correct something that we may put out there incorrectly? Thank you.
I'll take that one.
Well, we do have phone numbers and emails. So yes, Randy, I love how you're at every Greenwood meeting. So I love that. I love an engaged citizen, or the less tabling at every Franklin meeting. So it's great to see people that go to every meeting. Yeah, so if you ever see something in your group where you're like, I don't know if that's right or not, you could always definitely ask us, add me on Facebook. call, email. I'm here. And yeah, we would love that, honestly. Like if you see something that's weird and you're like, I want to know if that's true. Or like also platforms posting, like allowing people to copy and paste whole stories into the comments is something that I've had a problem with personally. I would before like try to get people to stop doing it, but now I just report it and hope that they'll realize that they maybe shouldn't have our entire story posted in the comment if it's behind a paywall. But luckily, a lot of the stories that are not behind a paywall are something that is like, I don't put things behind a paywall that are like something that you need to know for your safety, for example, or for voting. Like all of our voting information is not behind it either. So that's the main thing, other than the misinformation that I've found concerning on social media. What else?
I'm looking at the clock here and realizing we're coming up on this, so I'm going to give the panel a chance to share any last thoughts, starting with Casey, since Leeann is the host of the Daily Journal for the event. We'll give her the last word. Start with you, Casey.
I think just one last thought, and not to get too into like media theory, but it's something that I think I wanted to mention earlier and just didn't get to, is this idea, we were talking about, somebody had asked about the politicians, for example, and sometimes they get upset, or sometimes readers get upset because of how a story is presented and they assume bias. And we have this idea called both sidesism, where as journalists, you're often taught when you're reporting a story, you put this person's side and then you put that person's side, and that's your story. Like, here's what both people on both sides of this issue think. And that can be really dangerous to do it that way. And I tried, especially when we have younger reporters come in and have these discussions, because there's more to it than that. And just because two people or three people or whomever each say different things, when I'm sitting, for example, in a committee meeting in the State House, it may be irresponsible of me to give each of those sides the same weight in a story, for example, or to frame the story based on one person's point of view more so than I do another's. And that's something that we have to constantly be very, very, we need to think about, because if I give more weight to one person's side of things in a story than I do to another, like I said, that may be inaccurate. And then it may be that I let my bias or that other person's bias unfairly have a stake or weight in the story. And especially now, and especially with how partisan things can be, I just wanted to say that we're very aware of that. And I think I have that conversation with myself every single day, especially during legislative session, of thinking, how much do I give weight to each side? And at what point do I give the decision to quote somebody in a story, for example, and it's my responsibility to correct what they say, for example, or to make sure that the truth is still in the story, even if it's not somebody's side, or it may not be verbatim, what they said. So, yes.
John.
I think with local journalism is going through a fight to stay relevant, but that doesn't mean that as a society we should be fighting. We need to be able to have civil discourse and civil engagement, and local news is a huge part of that. And I think that local news doesn't just stop with us and the people that are in each state reporting from their TV or radio stations or newspapers, whatever. Local news is also a big part of the public. It's all of you. It's everybody out there that we're going to go encounter when we leave here. And I would just encourage all of you to let those people know that if they see something, to speak up. I cannot tell you how many times I found a story because somebody messaged me or somebody approached me somewhere. And that can't stop. That has to, because you have no idea how that can get the ball rolling in a positive direction. And then you tell a story that needs to be told simply because of one tip. So that's something that we got to keep going with, and we got to keep trying, no matter how ugly or difficult things can get sometimes.
I would just say, kind of going off what both you said, the public's involvement with us as local media is very important. And, you know, our job is to present the news to the public, you know, what your local elected officials are doing, how your tax money is being spent. But it should be a two-way street. Like, if the public doesn't like what we're doing, like if somebody has a question about what we're doing, or if you don't like what we're doing, that's okay. If you should, you know, we should have that conversation, kind of like what we're doing now, where you are asking questions about how we deal with certain things. I think that's important to have a dialogue. If, you know, the public goes away and our readers go away and they don't interact with us, then it kind of feels like you're shouting into the abyss, like, here's the news, and no one's responding, and you have no idea. And then people will say, you know, offhand to you when they run into you, you're like, oh, I don't like, you know, the Daily Journal, I don't like the Capitol Chronicle because if they write this, but I'm like, I've never heard anybody say that to me before. So that's important too. So I would encourage you to, you know, go out and, you know, tell your friends and your community, you know, it's okay to give feedback to your local media source, because it's important to us sustaining what we do and bringing you this information.
In fact, I would encourage you, because I love seeing people in my inbox. I love readers saying I did a great job. I love them saying I did a bad job. I love seeing corrections, believe it or not. It's slightly embarrassing to do them, but you got to do them. And I hate finding out that we did something wrong a month later. So do that promptly. Reach out, because we do this because of all of you. We do this for all of you. We became journalists because we care about getting the facts out there and making sure you know what's going on in your government and like things that you do. So we can't do it without you. And we write about our communities based on what you want to see, what we think you need to see. So it all goes back to interaction, building trust, and knowing that the readers are people, that we're people, and that we can coexist and help each other. So reach out. We love it.
Please do. It's 7:30, Ron.
I just wanted to say that we'd be remiss if we didn't recognize a Daily Journal icon in the back row.
Yeah, actually Bud's out of the room now. He's in the back.
Yeah.
Oh, there he is. And while you're applauding, please give a round of applause for our wonderful. And while you're at it, give yourselves a round of applause.
You know, I love the passion that you told us about, you know, of the museum.
We're all a little, thank you.